Hello and welcome back for another installment in our Courtroom Confidential Conversations series. For this episode, please join me in welcoming a criminal defense attorney with nearly 2 decades of experience in trial and appellate work, a legal analyst and commentator, and the host of her own wildly popular YouTube channel, Andrea Burkhart. Hey, Andrea, how are you? It's so good to see you.
Thanks, Josh. It's great to be here.
I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down with us for a little bit of time. And I do mean that seriously because your schedule is so busy with the amount of trials that are out there and crazy things that are happening and the amount of time that you put in to covering all these things. I know that you are not one of those YouTubers who just hops on for 15 minutes. You do some marathon long coverage of these cases. How has that been?
It's been very rewarding, honestly. My approach to covering a legal case has always been to go deep rather than to go wide. So I don't necessarily cover a lot of cases. I focus on ones that really catch my interest for one reason or another, and then do my best to uh, yeah, go pretty deep into the details and the legal issues and things like that. So it's just a little bit of the nature of the approach that I've taken, but I find it's just most consistent with kind of my personal interest in the case, and I've found that my audience tends to appreciate that level of depth as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is not only admirable, but it's also astonishing to me because I'll watch and you manage to make 4 or 5 hours go by and you don't notice it because you're so just hanging on the coverage that you're doing on it and the in-depth uh analysis that you're doing of all of it. So I applaud that. I'm more than anything knowing a little bit what it's like to be on the other side of the camera. I'm thinking to myself, she must be exhausted. She's got her legs gotta hurt, her butt's gotta hurt. She has she taken a bathroom break yet? Are you are able to survive these things?
Well, if there's one thing that having a career as an attorney, especially doing trial work, teaches you, it's how to manage stress and how to kind of put your own personal discomfort aside for the purpose of the objective that you have to fulfill. So I do sometimes get quite exhausted. I do get kind of thirsty, but it's just part of the process. I have the approach that these types of things are really temporary, and it's just part of the trade off of doing an in depth review of a case or emotion or something like that. That just sometimes, yeah, it's going to take a little bit more effort than other times.
No, you make an excellent point. If you're a trial attorney, you're used to some discomfort in sitting there, especially when you're hearing some miserable testimony against your client and you've been sitting in court all morning long. So you've built up those endurance muscles already. But that brings me to my first serious question. Those were kind of silly questions, but you mentioned being a trial attorney. Are you currently practicing as an attorney as we sit here today?
I am. In fact, I have an oral argument in the Court of Appeals in Spokane, Washington, on Wednesday. That I'm
Oh
gonna I'm
man.
gonna be preparing for. Uh, I am wrapping down my legal practice at this point. I'm not actively seeking out or taking on new cases, but I do still have a legal practice and a caseload that I continue to manage.
Wow, that's incredible. And I take some experience from that as well. I'm still practicing and it's hard to keep a lot of spinning plates all in their place at once. So bring us back to your working attorney. You've mentioned trial work, you've mentioned, you've got an appellate hearing. Bring us back before all of this crazy YouTube world. Where did you get your start? What were you doing first in your career?
So I had sort of a convoluted path into the law. It's one of those outcomes that probably a lot of other people saw it coming long before I did. I just went to a private liberal arts school that's near where I grew up in the beautiful town of Walla Walla, Washington, and I was a philosophy student. I had a classics minor. I thought I was going to go into academia and study Plato and just have that type of a career. But I found as I got towards the end of my time in school that I just got very burned out on academics. So I decided to take some time away, and had what I suppose some people would call a gap year. It ended up being 3 years for me, but I moved to Lake Tahoe. And I lived in South Lake Tahoe for about 3 years. Had a variety of different jobs there. I worked in the Superior Court as a court clerk, and so that was kind of my first exposure to that whole environment, that whole arena, the opportunities to um, be a helper in that type of role. I also worked in construction in the area, and that was my first real exposure to a complex legal system because the regulatory environment around development and construction in Lake Tahoe, it's very unique, because it's a national, natural resource of big significance. It's in 2 states, so there's an interstate type of planning organization that manages all of this. So that was kind of my first insight into, wow, how difficult and complex it can be to navigate the law. So it was really those two experiences together that took me to law school. Um, so I did. I went to Thomas Jefferson School of Law down in San Diego. Thomas Jefferson no longer exists as a law school. They lost their accreditation and
Oh, no.
went out of business. But I went back in the 2000s, and the reason why I went there was largely for financial reasons. They had a program where their financial aid package was based on your LSAT score, and so my LSAT score was such that I qualified for full tuition. So that was pretty hard to turn down. A law degree, even from a school that maybe isn't the greatest school, but one that you get without hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt. Just offers so many more opportunities for being able to pursue different career options, than many of my friends that I saw who continue to this day sometimes to still be burdened down by massive amounts of student loan debt. So after I got my degree. I ended up coming back to Washington because I got a position as a judicial clerk in the Court of Appeals. This was over in Division Two, which is in Tacoma, Washington. And I clerked for the then chief judge at the time, Elaine Houghton. The experience as a clerkship, in the clerkship, was really transformative for me because it opened my eyes to uh, just how the law has this a little bit of tension between, on the one hand, there's a strong push to specialize and to become very, uh, acquire expertise in one specific area and really focus on that. But that can come into a little bit of tension with the needs of communities that are smaller, that don't necessarily have access to, big law firms, or, the ability to pay, large law firm types of prices and things like that. And it also just made me aware that, look, here I am, flat out of law school, and I'm being entrusted with researching and making recommendations about cases that are being briefed by some of the top lawyers in the state. So it gave me much more of an appreciation of the law as something that is simply there. It's a technique more than it is a knowledge base. And so if you learn how to research and you learn how to analyze, there really isn't a limit on what a lawyer can really do.
That is such a clever way of putting it, and I don't know if I've heard anyone articulate it that way before, but it really law school really is teaching you much more about how to think and how to analyze and how to absorb this information. And yeah, you do get a vocabulary, you do have kind of a general way of speaking and understanding that is fluent throughout the different areas of practice, but you're so right that I have not taken a look at property law since I went to law school, or
Mhm.
contracts. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you learn in law school that you never look at again, depending on the field that you go into. But if you handed me a case from a property law dispute, I could I could struggle my way through it because of the way that we were taught to think and the way that we were taught to analyze it. I love the way that you
Mhm.
put that, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's interesting. So you had this realization of being a clerk for the judge there.
I did, and so it just gave me a little bit of a wider perspective, I think, on how you can use the law, just the types of opportunities that really are out there. I never wanted to go into big law. I never wanted to live in a big city. I'm not a big city girl. I was raised in a small town. I've lived most of my life in small towns, and that's just kind of the community that I'm more comfortable in. And they have different needs than big city communities often do. So I wanted to be able to have more of a balanced practice. Hell to me sounded like, spending 30 years sitting in front of a desk filling out the same, social security disability form or something like that, over and over and over again. I always wanted to have the opportunity to have a little bit of variety in my practice. And so once I finished my clerkship, the first question is, well, what do you do now? And where I felt I had the biggest gap in my skill set at that point was in trial experience. I didn't have any trial experience. I had researched, all kinds of different legal questions and kind of figured out how to do that. But as far as actually, myself walking a case through court, that was something that was completely foreign to me. So I took a job as a public defender, and I spent a little bit over a year in the Yakima Department of Assigned Counsel, as a baby lawyer, doing a lot of misdemeanor. It's commonly when you're entry level into criminal defense, you're doing a lot of driving offenses, you're doing low level misdemeanor convictions, things like that. So that was my first kind of foot in the door, when it came to getting trial experience. Then later on, I moved into private practice. This was one of those situations that was kind of just serendipity. Serendipity has played a big role in my life. Maybe it does for a lot of people. It's just something that I feel like I notice a lot in my own experience. But I was looking at getting a little bit closer to home, changing my environment. And just like I said, I kind of always wanted to have the ability to try different things with my legal practice and not get stuck, in one particular, doing one particular thing all the time. So I just happened to find out a little bit through the grapevine that there was an attorney over in Walla Walla who had been a solo practitioner, a career solo practitioner, and he had just been elected to the Superior Court. So he had a law practice that he was looking to hand over to somebody. And I thought, well, I could maybe be that person. And my husband is also a lawyer, and so he was on board with this as well. So that's what we ended up doing. We went in and we took over this private law practice. It was a great way to get some of that first initial experience with the transition, being able to work with somebody for several months, who had handled all of these different matters, in a small town, in a general retail type of practice. You handle a little bit of everything. You're
Oh,
handling the
yeah.
real estate transactions, you're handling their estate planning, you're, handling their kids' criminal cases. I mean, all types of things come up. And
It's so
so
let me interrupt you for a second because I'm curious. So you and your husband were
mhm,
became partners and took it over, became partners
we did.
beyond life, became partners in law and took over this practice.
We did, and we did that for just under 10 years.
Wow. How long were you at you called it I forget the word you used, but it's what
Uh,
I would say the public defender's office. You called it the what?
it's the Yakima County Department of Assigned Counsel.
Gotcha. How long were you there?
I was there for just over a year, maybe a year and a half, somewhere in that ballpark.
Okay, so you cut your teeth in trial practice there, which by the
Yes,
way, good on you. What a lot of people don't appreciate is how few lawyers have actually ever done a trial. Like
it's true.
the trial practice is such a small part of being an attorney for most attorneys, and then even attorneys, if they're not somewhere like the public defender's office or the district attorney's office, even being a busy trial attorney might be one or two a year. So when you
Mhm,
hear about an attorney who's done a dozen or more trials, it's an incredibly impressive thing, though it may not sound like it. That's my just a
mhm,
little aside to everyone. So good on you that you got some trial experience. And I love the way that you describe this new practice of yours. It reminds me of kind of like a small town doctor where
mhm,
you don't go to a specialist, you go to the doctor, and the doctor
mhm.
takes care of it if it's your knee or your head or your nose and throat, that doctor's the one handling it, like your practice was handling pretty much everything that walked through the door.
Sure, and so then part of your responsibility too in that setting is to be really aware of what your limits are because yeah, okay, certainly there's a pretty broad spectrum of practice that I think any general practitioner can probably navigate pretty comfortably. But there definitely are going to be areas that they're going to be a little bit too technical, a little bit too specialized. Situation where it's going to be better to go ahead and refer that one out. And so just finding out kind of where those limits are. Is an important part of being able to have a practice like that. So, for example, I would not during my time, I wouldn't get involved in immigration. It was just one of these areas that it's far too specialized. It's got its entire unique court system, its whole legal structure. It's not that I couldn't learn how to be an immigration lawyer if I wanted to. It's just that the scope of acquiring expertise in that is way more in depth than, for example, to learn how to write a real estate contract that's going to hold up, foreclosure type of process or a litigation process. Um, so just recognizing a little bit where those limits are and appreciating when you don't know, what you don't know when you don't know it. I thought it gave me a little bit more of a deeper appreciation of all these different areas of the law.
Yeah, of course. Was a large part, I'm guessing, criminal defense?
It was. And so almost from the outset, I did contract defense work. So in Eastern Washington, where I reside, most of our smaller counties don't have central public defense agencies. They all contract with private attorneys to provide defense services. And then you end up with kind of a different community character depending on how many of them there are, how many of them have been around for a while, and so just different opportunities for mentorship and things like that. So I did in several different counties. I did private criminal defense. I did contract criminal defense. One of the things that also comes up in small communities is that defense often encompasses quite a bit more than just your standard. Like I was doing in Yakima County, representing people on low level criminal charges. Obviously, the more experienced you get, the more you get into high level criminal charges, but you also end up dealing with juvenile matters. You also end up dealing with kids in the foster system. You end up dealing with sometimes post conviction issues. These are all things where there can be a right to a counsel, right to assistance of counsel, involuntary commitment cases, contempt over child support, like all these kinds of collateral sort of matters that you don't necessarily think about when you think about what a public defender does. But because those are all situations where there may be a right to counsel for some or more of the parties involved, then often especially in the smaller community where that workload is just kind of spread out among the pool of people who are taking assignments, you get again a broader exposure to those different practice areas.
That's fascinating. And I want to kind of explain this for our listeners and viewers is that in larger counties, you have a established public defender's office and it's funded by taxpayers and you've got dozens if not more attorneys who that's all they do all day long is handle cases. In the smaller counties and communities, like you're saying, you either sign up for it. I've even heard of counties where if you're a lawyer there, it's part of being a lawyer there is that you're on the list that you may get a criminal case because everybody's got a constitutional right to have a lawyer, and if they don't have an office that provides that, they've got to find lawyers to provide to these people. So you are just kind of working as an attorney, but also every once in a while receiving a phone call saying, "Hey, you've got to defend a DUI," or "Hey, you've got some other," as you just described, vast array of issues you might have to handle.
Hmm. Yeah, very, very much. And in Washington state, it's the counties that are primarily responsible for funding the public defense system. So that can vary state by state. In some of them, the state takes the primary responsibility. In other ones, it's the county. So with Washington being funded at the county level, what you find then is that there is just an enormous difference that you can see in how just the entire system works from county to county. Some of them that provide fairly generous funding and access to experts and investigators and things like that. Other counties that are not so inclined, and that can cause some issues. We've actually got there are many jurisdictions right now that have a public defense crisis. It's just getting more and more difficult to find people that are willing to do the very difficult work that public defense often is, for the type of pay that frankly is usually not all that extraordinary. The types of hours that are involved, and often the caseloads can just be extraordinarily stressful,
Yeah.
challenging.
Not to mention, you may be a lawyer practicing something as low crisis as putting together contracts, and now all of a sudden you're handling someone who may be going off to prison for a very long period of time. That's a dramatic shift in stress.
It is, and it's an enormous responsibility, that I always found was one of the biggest differences between doing criminal work and doing civil work, is simply that with criminal work, somebody's life and liberty is on the line. In civil cases, it's not that they don't matter to people, but the civil system is designed to be about money. It's designed
Yeah.
to be about financial compensation, and for redressing wrongs in that way. And so it's not that it doesn't matter to people, it certainly does, but just the scope of what's at stake, is so significant in a criminal case that that responsibility, it can be quite overwhelming. So anyway, because of some of these problems with being able to fund public defense that are all over the country, places are experiencing this. Washington is no different. Some counties have not funded public defense at the level that it needs to be sufficient. And so we've had a number of jurisdictions now with problems where people are sitting in jail because you have a right to an attorney for arraignment, but they don't have attorneys to be appointed. And so sometimes, 30 days or more, people are sitting in jail with no ability to move their case forward, because the county simply isn't appointing an attorney to represent them. So there's a lawsuit that got filed fairly recently against Yakima County, where I used to work, that relates to these types of issues. But it's a real systemic issue all over the country.
Yeah, it is. A friend of mine moved from Los Angeles to a smaller county in Tennessee and was shocked by how long people are waiting around to have their cases heard. We're used to this kind of breakneck speed at which a case is shuttled through the system, and they've got people, like you said, just sitting around in jail waiting to have their
Mhm.
case heard because they just don't have the resources to hear it. Pretty
Mhm.
astonishing.
And what you end up with is you end up with this kind of two-track system where on the one hand you have people that are simply so desperate to get out. The time pressure is significant because you're sitting in jail, you're not working, you're not making money, you're not paying your child support. All of those types of things are very important to people. And so there's strong pressure to simply plead out, regardless of whether you're guilty, regardless of whether there are viable legal challenges to you, simply just for purposes of getting it resolved. So you end up with this track of cases that are very quickly dealt with, because people are voluntarily giving up their rights. Then, on the other hand, yeah, you have people that do want to maintain their innocence, or do want to, challenge the process. It can take years. It can take years
Incredible.
to get a case to
Yeah.
trial, notwithstanding speedy trial protections that we're supposed to have under the Constitution, and under various rules and statutes and so forth.
Yeah, what you find is that speedy trial is under broad, interpretation as to what that what that actually means.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
so you're in private practice now, and you said for about 10
Hmm.
years. What was the next kinda step for you?
So we transitioned out of our private practice when my husband's mother got ill. She was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and so it just was a situation where we didn't know if he was going to potentially, have to drop everything and be going and spending time with her and helping out and things like that. It wasn't real compatible with a big civil caseload. So we transitioned out of that. At this point in time, I was doing both trial work and appellate work as a public defender. And I had the opportunity to basically switch to being full time on the appellate side. And that's what I did. The main reason why is because it's an easier practice to be able to do, from home or just from a smaller office because it's paper based, it's document based. It isn't a situation where I'm out interviewing new witnesses or things like that. I'm just reviewing a record of something that's already happened in court and submitting legal briefing based on that. So that's where I transitioned my practice into, and that's what I've been doing since, oh gosh, 2018 or so,
Oh,
2017,
wow.
something like that. About the last 6 years, yeah.
You kind of touched on it, but explain to people listening what does that mean, appellate work? We
Mhm.
throw that term
Mhm.
around a lot, but when do you get involved and what are you looking at? Because you
Mhm.
talked about I'm not you're not talking to witnesses, you're reviewing documents. So kind of
Mhm.
explain people the scope.
Yeah, so my clients have all already been convicted of something. They have already been found guilty at trial. Is most of the way that it works. Uh, Occasionally, I'll get somebody who has tried to appeal from a guilty plea, but 99% of the time, if you plead guilty to something, you are waiving your right to appeal. And so it's very limited what kind of circumstances would allow you to appeal from a guilty plea. So most of the time, my cases are somebody has gone to trial, they have lost at trial, and my job then is to review what happened and see, has there been a legal error here along the way? Was there a motion to suppress that was denied that should have been granted? Was there witness? Was there a witness that was offered that wasn't allowed to testify for some reason? I'm just essentially looking at the overall process to see, is there a problem here with the process that led to this conviction that somehow left it unreliable or left it unfair? And so it's a review process, is the fundamental nature of an appeal. And that's where it's really different from the trial, where the trial, you are actually developing the theory. You're investigating, you're trying to figure out what are the facts, what is the evidence, what type of witnesses can support my position. By the time the case gets to me, those decisions have already been made. And so my job is really just to review how that process unfolded and try to make sure that it's fair.
One I get asked a lot on the cases that you and I both kind of talk about and analyze. Well, do you think what's going to happen on appeal? What do you think? Do they have a good shot on appeal? And maybe you can provide a better answer to this. But I usually say it comes down to a decision that the judge made. It's not going to be
Mhm.
about, oh, they should have called this witness, or oh, did something happen with the way that the attorney argued something. It's usually going to come down to, did the judge make a call, and was
Mhm.
that call somehow wrong, and not only wrong, but then hurt the defense.
Mhm.
That's my third grade way of explaining it.
I think that's a great way of explaining it. I mean, it's very accurate. There's not that many errors that will result in somebody getting a new trial. The only one that I can think of that does sometimes happen, although it's pretty rare, but doesn't necessarily directly involve a judge's ruling, is if there's simply insufficient evidence of one of the elements of the crime. And so it's just a situation where maybe you have a crime that has um, a very specific requirement. I'll give you an example of one that I handled, that I did win on appeal, and I won it because I had an excellent trial attorney who made the record of this point. For Washington, when you have the charge of attempting to elude a police officer, so basically a flight, right? And there's usually a chase and that type of thing. there's very specific requirements in our statute to convict somebody of eluding. And so there has to be proof that you're in a marked patrol car, that you're in uniform, that the lights and sirens have been activated. And so it's not that uncommon for a prosecutor, especially if it's a novice or a younger prosecutor who hasn't necessarily handled a lot of these cases, to miss some of those kinds of they're almost foundational types of issues. And so the proof can just fail on one of those elements. So I did have one of those cases where I won that on insufficient evidence, simply because, yeah, I forget if it was the being in uniform or being in the marked patrol car, but just one of those requirements. They just simply never introduced anything that would get that into the record. But that's a very rare situation. Most of the time, like you said, what you're dealing with a motion to suppress, that the trial court denied. You're dealing with a motion to exclude evidence, or a motion to admit evidence. If the defense has something, for example, a third party culprit defense or something like that, and the judge, rules, I don't think it's met the standard, then often, yes, it's the review of those types of decisions that are really the meat of what appellate work is about. Because the courts aren't going back and looking at, do we agree with the verdict? The only time the weight of the evidence really comes in an appeal process is once we've established that there's an error, what kind of effect did that have on the outcome of the trial? And so if you have a case where there's extremely strong evidence of guilt, regardless of, this evidence that came in through a motion to suppress that should have been denied, it's not going to matter. It's that evidence would not have significantly changed the weight of what's happened because it's already so overwhelming. But on a case where the evidence is much more marginal, than those types of decisions have the potential to have a lot more impact on the outcome of the trial. So it just goes to the evaluation of the fairness of the process, given the decision. Assuming we have a decision that was wrong, what was the actual and practical impact on that? And you have to look at the totality of the case to really be able to figure that out.
And so that's why, folks, you're hearing these defense attorneys sometimes make these objections that you think are ridiculous, or arguments that you think, where exactly do they get off making this argument? Many times they're just preserving this for appeal,
Mhm.
because if they don't make that objection and they don't make that argument, knowing that that argument will likely be shut down by the judge, but if they don't preserve that, as Andrea pointed
Mhm.
out, then she's got nothing to argue. So
Mhm.
many times we're screaming at the attorney, thinking that he doesn't know what he's talking about, but sometimes he's playing 3D chess and he's just trying to make sure he made a record. All right, so now you are deep in appellate work,
Mhm.
but how in the world do we end up on YouTube and cameras and people chatting with you and everything else? What started that whole journey?
Well, sometimes I'd like to know that myself. I did not jump into the law tube sphere very quickly, or honestly, really very enthusiastically. It came about because I was following the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case,
Well,
and I was following it mostly on Twitter. But the reason why I had a little bit of, I think, different insight into the case is because I had followed it all the way back when it was in the UK. So when it first went to trial over in the UK, that's when it really caught my attention, and I was paying attention to the evidence. And that's part of the reason why I got so fascinated with it in the first place, because once I became aware of what the sort of factual context here was, what the real dispute was, I realized, oh my gosh, this is actually going to go to trial in Virginia. Like, most of the time when you have defamation cases involving a public figure, they're not going to go forward. But just because of the posture of this one, and the fact that it wasn't involving a media organization, it was involving, the person who would have actual knowledge of the truth or falsity of these claims, is the defendant in the case. It became very clear to me that it's going to go forward in Virginia, and it's going to be a big deal there. So I was following the case on Twitter. I started talking about the case on Twitter, and that's sort of where things started to blow up, because I just found people had enormous curiosity and interest in some of these what we might consider as lawyers kind of arcane details of the legal process and legal rules and things like that. But people just wanted to understand it better, to have a better appreciation of what is actually happening here, and is this right, and is this normal, and things like that. So I found myself, for example, I would write like long tweet threads about things like collateral estoppel. And it's absolutely fascinating to people, right? Collateral estoppel is this idea of whether a judgment in a different case precludes you from having a trial on a similar or related type of issue in another case. And so it came up, of course, because they had this trial in the UK, but the trial in the UK wasn't between Johnny and Amber; it was between Johnny and Indian newspapers. And so this just became one of those legal issues of, well, because the UK court found against Johnny in that process, is that going to have some type of legal effect in Virginia? So I went down the rabbit hole and I did the legal research and found actually Virginia follows this minority rule now, where you only get preclusive effect like this if you have both parties involved in both cases. And so since Amber Heard was not a party in the UK, it's very clear under the Virginia law that it's not going to have preclusive effect. That did end up being how the trial court ruled. And so I think that just maybe got me a little bit of credibility in the sphere that I was able to kind of walk through and show the process of this is what a lawyer does. Like, this is how you identify what the issue is. You research the question, you find the cases, you see what they say, and then based on that, you can try to predict the outcome. So
So
I had a
so funny
fairly
when you say collateral estoppel, I got a feeling in my gut of of flashbacks and PTSD from law school. That's so funny.
Mhm,
And you make a point too. My wife is always telling me, "Oh, you should comment on such and such that may have occurred in
mhm,
the news, or you should put out a tweet or do a YouTube video about it." And I'm always telling her, "Oh, that's boring," or "Oh, it's going to turn out to be nothing. It's just X, Y, Z." But it's true. You take for granted that maybe people don't understand it, and maybe something
mhm.
as kind of mind numbing to you and I as collateral estoppel might be fascinating to other people to just understand how it works.
Absolutely. It was a real kind of view into the lawyer's mind, and just how that works, and how the lawyer sees the case so differently from maybe the public at large does when it comes to a specific issue like that. Um, and there's a lot of issues like that I've found that I wouldn't necessarily think that people are going to be interested in it. But when people are really interested in a case, they're really interested in all the issues that relate
Yeah.
to the case. And so it's a way to explore a lot of what is going on in the legal environment. Um, so that was ended up being my foot in the door to YouTube. I got a fairly large Twitter following talking about this case. So a YouTube account, Colonel Kurtz, who was making videos about the trial, she invited me on to interview, and so I appeared on her channel a few times. Then as the trial started to get underway in Virginia, there were lots of law tubers following it, so they became aware of me as well. They invited me onto their channels, and it just was through that process. People encouraged me, Andrea, you really should make your own channel. You should do it. And I really resisted for a few reasons. I wasn't looking for a job. I wasn't looking to be famous. Like, it's just I've been a public defender my whole career. Like, I'm kind of a helper when it comes to the law. And so I didn't want to take on something that was going to be bigger than I could really fully commit to. But what ended up changing my mind was during the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. The Isaac Baruch had this cross examination by Amber Heard's attorney that was just one of the biggest train wrecks I've ever seen. Anytime I've watched a trial, it was a master class in how to not handle a cross examination, and then it combined that with this witness who is just naturally one of the most skilled witnesses I have seen on the stand. Not like apparently, because he prepared or rehearsed or anything like that, he just has this skill set naturally as a person that was extremely effective and powerful. And so I thought, I should make a series about this disaster of a cross examination because that's the kind of thing I would enjoy, right? I feel like that would be good content and it would be fun. And so I did. I started my YouTube channel to make my Isaac Baruch cross examination series, which is it's the first thing I ever did. It's still probably my favorite thing I've ever done. It was a lot of fun. And basically, what I did is I compared it to a boxing match. I box. I've boxed for about 10 years,
Oh,
and so
wow.
I would just kind of use that comparison of like, okay, you have these different strategies and these different, counter attacks and things like that. Um, and then I went through and like scored, kind of round by round how the cross examination went, and I had a lot of fun with it. So after that, I was kind of hooked on YouTube.
I love it. Was Isaac kind of the extremely charismatic gentleman that was called early in the trial, right?
Hmm.
Yes, I
Yep.
remember him too. I remember thinking, boy, if this is how it's going to be, this is going to be one hell of a trial because he just kind of took over that courtroom. And I do remember the attorney just being kind of lost in the ability
Hmm.
to do anything with him. That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, he just had this insane talent to be able to neutralize every single different approach that she tried. It was it was really something to see.
Yeah, he just I think what it was is he did not give an F. He had
Mhm.
an incredible did not care, cameras, important people, celebrities, the world watching, none of that seemed to matter to this gentleman. I imagine he conducts himself that way if he's being cross-examined or
Mhm.
ordering dinner. He's the same guy. Um,
Exactly, and that was the power, the authenticity that he
yeah.
brought to his testimony, and then the reactions that he had, the emotion that he showed. It made it so extremely powerful.
Before we get to anything else, boxing. Where
Mhm.
did that come from? And tell us a little bit about that.
So I got into boxing about 10 years ago, and it's not really a very good story. I used to run a lot, and it was just one winter where I don't know. It's like October, and I'm waking up, and it's dark, and it's cold, and it's drizzly. I'm like, I don't want to be out doing this at 5 in the morning. I need to find something indoors that I can do. And so I I ended up in a boxing gym. I thought it would be, it's good cardio. I thought it would be a good workout. And so initially I thought, yeah, I'm just going to do this for fitness. But after, I don't know, a few months, 6 months or so, I was in a gym where fortunately there were lots of women who competed and they would spar, and so I would get to watch and like, that actually looks pretty fun. Like they're having a good time in there. Maybe I'll give that a try. So I did. I competed a couple of times. I'm very old for boxing, and so the older you get, the harder it gets to be medically cleared to be able to compete. It's also harder to find matches. You're in the masters division above a certain age, and so I went to the trouble, I guess, to do that a couple times just to test it out. I would still like to, but USA Boxing currently makes you choose between whether you want to be a coach or whether you want to be a competitor. So I'm in a position now where I can be more helpful in a coaching role because my opportunities to compete would be pretty minimal anyway. So
That is fascinating to me. I thought you were going to say, "Oh, I do these cardio heavy bag classes where they play, pop music." But no, you're talking about getting into the ring, competing. Hats off. That's pretty impressive.
yeah, it's a whole different level. Like I still remember the first time I sparred the girl who's actually the story of my fish. My friend Heidi, she's one of my best friends on the planet, like my sister from another mother, Uh she is probably 100 pounds dripping wet, and she is one of the fiercest competitors that you will ever meet in your life. She's one of the toughest boxers that we have in the gym. And so my very first round is against her. I'm not small. Okay, I'm 5'10". I probably have 50 pounds on this girl. And she just walked right up to me, popped me right in the nose. Oh, okay. I guess that's how it's gonna be. Um, But it's a very different,
Oh,
you can practice on the
yeah.
floor and practice on the bag and everything, and, you can be in good shape to do that too. You can get in very good shape, and as soon as you get in the ring for the first time, it's you're starting over. You're starting from ground zero.
Yeah.
The adrenaline takes it to this whole different level. The intensity goes to a whole different level. There's really nothing out there like it as far as I know.
100%. My father was a boxer, and we had had a heavy bag in our house my entire life growing up. But it
Mhm,
wasn't until later in my life that I actually got into to the point where I tried sparring a little bit. And you're
mhm,
100% right. First of all,
mhm,
it's beyond exhausting because of
mhm,
how tense you are and amped
mhm,
up and trying to protect yourself. So you wear yourself out in about 30 seconds. And then
mhm.
two, you can have a person that you feel like I could knock this guy out with a look, and he's just so much more skilled and been doing this so
Mhm,
much longer that they completely humble you. I am very
mhm.
impressed to hear this story. But you bring me to my next question out of nowhere. What is with the fish? Because you mentioned it. Tell
So
us.
yeah, well, so my fish have kind of become a little bit of a theme on my channel, and so these fish are created by my friend Heidi Elkington. You check her out on Instagram. She is an absolute amazing artist. She works in all kinds of different media, extremely talented. And so this is just a series that she did. These are metal pieces. They're called piranha whales. You can't necessarily see the details all that well because of the depth of field with my camera, but it's basically a combination between like the concept of Jonah and the whale, Jonah being in the belly of the whale, and kind of just the feeling of desperation and loneliness that you have in that context, with the piranha. The piranha being this kind of mindless, frightening predator. And so it just speaks to a little bit of the mood that I think is often the case when somebody is trapped within the criminal justice system, trapped within an oppressive type of environment, somebody that's been wrongfully accused, and just the type of experience that they have going through that. It really spoke to me with her symbolism. So that's kind of
I
the
love
story
it.
of the fish.
I absolutely love it, and I'm glad that I finally got an answer because I was searching your page and there's not much that sheds light on that.
Mhm,
Okay, so now Johnny Depp happens. You kind of
mhm,
get your feet wet, but now
mhm.
you're in the deep end now. Tell us about that transition and when did you finally decide, you know what, I'm going to really give this YouTube thing a shot.
Mhm. I kind of waited after the Johnny Depp trial to see, what else is out there. Is there going to be any other case like this that's going to capture my interest enough to want to really dive in and focus on it? And so there were a few things, kind of small scale, that I got interested in. But the one then that grabbed me and thought, okay, this is going to yank you back in on a deep level, was Brian Koberger's case. And so that happened. Kind of near my backyard. I'm where I'm at in Eastern Washington. I'm about 2 hours from Moscow, Idaho. I have all kinds of friends that went to WSU, friends that went to University of Idaho. So this is an area that's a little bit familiar to me, and the nature of the crime, obviously being so horrifying, is an attention getter. But I remember in the early days when it first happened as well. It for me. There was so much fear and concern in the community, and one of the issues that people were concerned about was, is this like a serial killer type of situation? We've kind of, in the last maybe 20, 30 years, or something like that, we don't have the same type of criminal patterns that we used to have, back in the area, the era of the Ted Bundys and the Green River Killers and things like that, who of course both are Washington cases as well. And we have a little bit of a history of that type of crime over in this part of Washington. There was a period in the 90s in Spokane, Washington, where there were a number of serial murderers of women. Robert Yates was one of them. And so it just, to me, was opening the question of, are we kind of having a throwback here to, this older era of crime in Washington, and is that some kind of indicator about, where crime is in the country, or just kind of the status of where we're at as a culture, all these types of things that I wasn't sure how any of that was going to play out. But it really did get my attention and get me focused on that case. So that is the one that I have probably been the most focused on since then, until Delphi happened. and and then got interested in covering that case as well.
And you went out to, Indiana for that case.
I
How
did,
was
and so
that?
that was really one of the reasons why it got my attention, was the lack of transparency for this particular case. This was the prosecution of Richard Allen by the state of Indiana, for the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German, two 13, 14-year-old girls, who were found murdered. The killing went unsolved for about 5 years before Mr. Allen was arrested. And there just was a lot that went on with the process that had me really scratching my head and not quite sure if this was looking real fair or not. The big thing that caught my attention, I mean, there were a lot of things, but one of the big things that caught my attention was that he was being held as a pretrial detainee in solitary confinement in a maximum security prison, despite having not been convicted of anything. And so there were some hearings about the effects that this was having on him, and this was very concerning to me. But the problem was, because this was a case that didn't have cameras in the courtroom, the ability to kind of get good information to be able to evaluate as a legal type of analyst, it just wasn't there. So I knew, if I'm going to try to cover this trial and give people some insight about what's going on with this trial, I'm going to have to be there in that courtroom, because there's just no way I'm going to be able to get detailed and accurate information otherwise without a camera feed. So that's what I did, and it was quite a wild experience. It was like nothing I have ever done or expected. Just the process of what was involved in trying to get into the courts. The kind of rules would change willy nilly. We never quite knew when we were going to have to line up to be able to get back into court. I ended up having a small army of people that just volunteered out of nowhere to say, Andrea, we're going to come sit in line for you so that you can do your live stream and you can get your sleep and you can be assured that you're going to be able to get in the courtroom to continue to do it the next day. There was no way I was going to be able to do all that by myself, because I mean, people are having to sleep out on the sidewalk outside of the courthouse, to be able to get into that courtroom. So it was really just an amazing experience in so many ways. Um, and obviously now the trial has concluded. He was found guilty. I have some fairly significant concerns about that, both just in terms of the evidence, but also again the process that led to this. So I'll be continuing to follow that as it goes through the appeal process.
Yeah, I was incredibly, troubled by the way that the judge handled the transparency issue as you described it in that case, and to
Mhm.
me, I've seen and been a part of incredibly high profile cases of great
Mhm.
public interest, and you do not see this kind of lockdown behavior that you saw in that case, and the part that bothered me the most about it was that it caused a lot of people to question, was justice taking place here? Because we don't know what's
Mhm.
going on. Whenever you
Mhm.
close down doors and you shut people's ability to review something, you're naturally going to have people going, well, that must be because you have something to hide. And what are you
Mhm.
hiding? And it creates this kind of firestorm of suspicion and doubt in the judicial system itself, which really troubled me. But just to explain, you're talking about, there was a lottery system to get inside. You're not allowed
Mhm.
to have electronics, so everybody's in there
Mhm.
taking handwritten notes. And you're not
Mhm.
you're a lawyer and you're used to understanding this, but now you're a reporter, because you're kind of the only eyes and ears inside of that courtroom to tell people what actually happened.
Yeah, it was a real shift in role for me, this coverage of the Delphi case because, I call myself a legal color commentator, right? I
Right.
like to kind of pull off of that sports that sports type of, metaphor, but that's really what I'm doing. I'm here to kinda call what I see and to give you the little bit of background information that you may not know if you're not a lawyer or you don't do this type of work or something like that, just to help you understand the process on a little bit of a different level. So I'm not used to being the fact source of information. Normally I'm watching the same live stream that everybody else is watching, or I'm reading the motion that's publicly available, or whatever. This was a very, very different dynamic where there was now a lot of pressure to not just help people understand what they're seeing, but to actually be the source of that information in the first place. And so it did kind of put me in a different role of having to shift between, okay, I've got my hat on now of here's the notes of what happened and what was said. And now here's my hat of what does this mean and what do I think about it? And, the more conventional analytical type of stuff that I'm used to doing. But I did enjoy it. I do think it was really important. It was an important case to have eyes on, and I think the fact that there were folks like me who were in there doing that, and who were committed to that process, had a big role in just kind of spreading the word about this case as being one that's important to pay attention to because of
Yeah.
so many of these concerns, like you said.
Yeah. And if it wasn't for folks like yourself and some others that I've spoken with, really, you know, sacrificing a lot of their time and energy to take it upon themselves to do that, we would have had almost nothing. I mean, it would have been some,
Mhm.
and I'm not trying to diminish what they do, but some, traditional journalists going in there and writing up an article, putting down in so many words what took place over the last 6 hours, and not being legal experts themselves to kind of break it down. It is, again, very curious to the point of troubling to me that that's the way the judge decided to handle that case. Did
Yeah.
that give you a taste for doing that? Like, do you think that that might be in the future for you? Something like Koberger going to trial next year? Is that something you think you might actually attend?
Yeah, it has. Coburger, I've probably, I mean, I've been planning to attend that kind of regardless. I think there is a very good chance that that one will be available on video. So it's not a situation where there's a need for eyes in the courtroom for people to be able to get the information. But there are so many courts around the country and cases around the country where that type of transparency isn't available. And so the obvious one is the federal courts. The cameras in federal courts are extremely limited. There is a pilot program that goes on in like a few select district courts where they're kind of sticking their toe in the water of seeing if that's going to work or not, but certainly not a widespread practice. And so that means things like the Diddy trial is
Yeah.
not going to be televised. Other cases like that in the federal system that can involve powerful people, high profile people, important political issues and things like that, often then are going to be shielded from the public eye. You also then have different states that have varying degrees of receptiveness or hostility to cameras. California, despite kind of being the birthplace of cameras in the courtroom, is now in this day and age extremely hostile to them. Not that common to get a televised trial out of California. New York, same thing. Not really. It's just not a thing there to have cameras in the courtroom. I would have loved to have been able to be there for the Daniel Penny trial, but the overlap just being what it was, I wasn't going to be able to do that. So I am. I'm a lot more attentive now to those cases that are potentially coming up in areas where there isn't going to be another source of information about it, and kind of evaluating if that's a project I want to take on. It is a lot. I mean, it was a lot. It was a big undertaking.
Oh, it sounds. I mean, from the folks that I've spoken to, it sounds exhausting. I mean, it sounded like. I mean, on top of your hand is going numb from all the notes. The acoustics, I understand, were horrible. You got to
Mhm.
stand it. Nobody's got time to eat lunch because they got to get back in line. It just sounded. It sounded miserable. But God
Yeah.
bless and thank you for doing it. With the last few minutes that I have you here, tell us, you've
Mhm.
kind of touched on it, and I think I get an idea, but tell us what is next for you and for the channel? Do you have plans about what people should expect coming up?
Well, I typically warn people, that especially that are new to my channel, that it can be a little bit of a roller coaster because I do my habit is to go in real deep and real thorough on a particular issue. Um, but then I might be gone for a little bit until the next one comes up, because I'm not just looking to, stream a court hearing or something like that in order to have a reason to be on camera. Like that's not my approach to live streaming. So it'll be when I find a new project that warrants taking that type of deep dive into it. I'm definitely going to be continuing on the Koberger case, and that's the main one that I would say in the short term will probably get most of my focus. I did cover Karen Reed the first time that she was tried, and so she's scheduled to be retried. They're going to try to do that one again. So I will likely be involved in covering that as well. But as far as the short term goes, honestly, I'm going to take a little time off.
Oh,
I'm
good for
going
you.
to recover a little bit. I've actually got plans. I'm going to go down to South America in January. Um, Spend some time down in Chile and Patagonia, which I went there for the first time last year. It's an amazing place. I'm very excited to go back. But that will probably get me off the radar a little bit. But I'm also building up my Substack. Substack is a way for me to do a little bit more of my commentary through writing, and the nature of my practice for almost 20 years has been very writing focused. As an appellate attorney, that's just what you do. You research things, you write about them. So it's often a little bit easier for me to put things out in that type of format than it is to sit in and make a video and plan it and produce it and all that type of thing. So I do have content like that I'm working on for Substack that I'll probably continue to focus on while I'm away as well.
Fantastic. Well, good for you. That's well-deserved little vacation, and I've never been, but I hear it is kind of a transformative place to go to. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you have a safe trip. You've mentioned your Substack. We've obviously talked a little bit about your YouTube channel, but please tell everybody listening, where can they find out more about you? Where can they find more of your coverage on these things?
Mhm. Those are the 2 main places, to look for my content. I do have an account on X, and so I'll sometimes run my mouth on there, but it doesn't tend to be, like an in-depth. I mean, it's just, X isn't an in-depth type of type of, media. So, but I'll have one-offs, and occasionally I'll do tweet threads and things like that, on X. I'm on Instagram, but I'm not super active there as well. That's more like if you want to see my pictures when I'm down in South America, I'll probably have them up in my stories, that kind of thing. But not so much in terms of legal commentary. But those are the main places to find me, and yeah, I'm just looking forward to getting a little bit of rest, and then the next thing will hit me. It always does. Never
Well,
fear.
and
Might take a minute, but it'll grab
especially in
me,
this
and then I'll be
business,
back on.
whenever you think things are calm and nothing's going on, just wait. Some big celebrity gets arrested or some
Mhm.
horrible murder takes place, so it's always changing. Andrea,
Yep.
this has been such a enjoyable conversation, and I've learned so much, and been surprised and shocked a couple of times. So thank you so much. I wanted to compliment you on the channel that you've built, but also the community and following of people that you have built and attracted. They're all wonderful folks. I'm a fan myself, and so I see the interaction that you have from the people who comment. Thank you again. This has been fantastic, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thanks so much, Josh. It's been a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed this interview. If there is someone you would like to hear from, a well known creator, or perhaps someone you feel that gets overlooked, please let us know in the comments. Please check out our playlist of past conversations. And as always, we appreciate you all. Please remember to like this episode and subscribe for more content like this. And thank you again for joining us for this episode of Courtroom Confidential Conversations.